Let's talk about the next type of membership meeting where you have homeowners that come together, special meetings. So a special meeting is called for a very special, very specific purpose. You have to be really careful with these. So if there's anything that requires your membership to vote on a matter, and that can be very specific, that's when you would call members together to have a meeting. These types of meetings are outlined in both state statute, in HOA, Minnesota Common Interest Ownership Act, and also in your bylaws typically, about what they're for, how you call them, how they're run, and the notice requirements of them. Just some examples of why you would call members together to vote on something. Some examples of that would include if your governing documents perhaps require that the membership vote on a special assessment. It's kind of 50-50. If an association needs a special assessment, half the time the board is just able to do that without, if the board says we need to operate the property and we need $50,000 because a bunch of trees just went down in a major storm that blew through, so we need that money, so we're going to assess you and then we're going to do the project. The other half the time, it might be a little less than half, the governing documents necessitate that the members actually have to vote on that special assessment. So that would be the purpose of a special meeting, is to approve a special assessment. Similarly with your dues, with the annual assessment dues. Sometimes the governing documents say that the board can only increase dues by 5% or 10%, whatever, a cap of a dues increase without that having to go to the board or to the homeowners, the membership, to approve. So that might be another reason for a special assessment is if we needed a 20% dues increase and the board had a cap of only 5%, okay, we have to call a special meeting to have the members then approve that increase. The other thing that might require the members to vote on something is if you're amending your governing documents. If you're amending your bylaws or if you're amending your declarations, that requires the homeowners to approve, to vote on. So that would be another reason for a special meeting. The other reason I'll touch on that is somewhat common, to be honest with you, because special meetings are not common. But when they are called, one of the common reasons would be the removal of directors. So your membership's not happy with you, so they want you gone. There's a mechanism for them to do that, which is to call a special meeting to remove the board. So those are the most common types of reasons why, as an association, you would call a special meeting. You're only calling it because you need the membership to vote on something. That's the purpose of it. There are requirements about the notice of that special meeting. Your governing documents, usually your bylaws are going to dictate it. If you're under HOA, it also says this. Most governing documents say the same thing that HOA says, and that notice requirement is usually no less than 7 days and no more than 30 days. So if you remember the annual meeting notice, it was 21 to 30. Well, for a special meeting, it's 7 to 30. And that's in place for a reason, because again, I mentioned that scenario of all of a sudden the association needs $50,000 and the board couldn't special assess without their approval. Well, like if the association needs it, we need to call a meeting yesterday. So let's call a special meeting for 1 week from tonight. So that's the reason why that language is there. But similar to the annual meetings, your governing documents might specify that notice of the meeting is required to go out by postal mail. So be careful about that. So it's so common we just do an email blast to get the people together. But be careful what your governing documents might say, because it might actually necessitate that there might be language that says notification by postal mail. So just look for that. In that notice, you're going to, similar to an annual, you're just going to do a cover letter of giving the date and the time and the place, and the reason why. Include the agenda, which should be pretty short, right? Include any supplemental material of what you're talking about and what you're ultimately voting on. Like if it's a governing document approval, well, you probably want to include the governing documents that are being proposed to approve, include those. So those are the types of things. And then maybe a ballot. I could do a whole session on voting by ballot, so I won't go into that, but if your governing documents allow for a direct ballot prior to the meeting, you got to follow procedures for that. Like I said, that's a whole nother thing, but you may or may not want to include the ballot for the special meeting. It just kind of depends. So we'll talk specifically a little later about the special meetings, but I do want to talk about one particular type of a special meeting purpose would be the removal of directors. Usually that happens by a petition to call a special meeting. So a special meeting is called in one of two ways. Special meeting is called by the president and or the board. The president themselves usually can demand that we're going to call a special meeting of the members, but usually it's because the board says, hey, we need to get people together to vote on whatever. So it can be called by the board or by the president directly. Or the other way a special meeting is called, and it's usually for the reason of the removal of directors, is by a petition of the members. And there's a very specific, it's usually in special meeting part of your bylaws that will go over the mechanism to do that. Most of the time it's this, that if the board receives a petition that's signed by, usually it's 30%, sometimes it's 20% of the members for a meeting to be called for this purpose, then the board must call the meeting. So a special meeting is called by a petition of the membership. So the most common reason you've got one of those meetings is you got some drama going on at your association, and a faction of people got together and said, we want to remove Bill from the board. Bill's a bad guy, so let's get him off. So 20 people got together and signed a petition that you have to call a meeting of the members to vote on Bill's removal. So then the board receives that, yep, the petition qualification was met, now we must call this meeting. And then you have to be careful because now there's a window of, we have to call the meeting within 7 to 30 days, and then you go through the vote. So those are the reasons why you would have a special meeting of the members, and those are the procedures for how you call the notice and then how you act at that meeting. Hopefully you're not experiencing special meetings very often because, again, they're only called for very specific and special purposes.